Hello, welcome to the webcast. We can see that we've got a few people signing in, so we're going to hang out for just a minute or so and let everybody get signed into the audio, and then we'll get started. Hello, and welcome to Self-Funding 101. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jen McCormick. I'm one of the account managers here at Haran. My background has been in human resources for most of my career, so I understand being the client and the importance of these types of education sessions, and so I'm glad you're here to learn a little bit more about self-funding. With me, I have Dacre Monroe, one of our financial consultants, and he's going to give an introduction.
Hi everyone, my name is Dacre Monroe. It's like Baker with a D, that's a unique name. I'm a financial consultant with our financial analyst team here at Haran who works in conjunction with account management. And it's really our mission to understand and control your healthcare costs. We do that by answering three important questions. What happened? Why did it happen? And what is going to happen? We build predictive models to improve your benefit strategy and achieve better outcomes. Our team is really a lot of data people, and whenever I tell that to some of our clients, sometimes I get some cringes from the HR folks. A lot of times data folks can sort of speak over the heads of some people with the complexity of it. Really the fun personal take that I bring to our team is that I'm a data translator. So I love taking that complex data and distilling it down into a story that's in a language that you can understand and make decisions on. And the fun part for me is when I get to learn about our clients, their unique culture and objectives, and connect them with that story. And then from there, connect them with the best solutions and actionable strategies to achieve those outcomes. One of those strategies that I have a lot of experience and expertise in is self-funding, not only gauging the viability for our clients in that transition, but also actually taking them through that transition from a fully insured arrangement to self-funding, which is why really I'm excited to be here today to talk about that strategy.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to be your MC today. Dacre is going to be your subject matter expert and is going to tell you about all things self-funding, or at least as much as we can get through in an hour. There's a lot to cover. The objective for the entire series is to teach the fundamentals of self-funding, to demonstrate employer experience, and to discuss some of the innovations and creative solutions emerging in the market. And some of those solutions are only available to self-funded plans, so that's what makes this a little bit unique. At the end of the series, you should walk away with a confident opinion on if self-funding is right for your organization, and then some clear next steps for evaluating your funding strategy. So the roadmap for the series, as you can see on the screen, 101 is the basics, and that's where we are today. We're going to give you all the information that you need to build on for session 201, building on the basics. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper there. And then 301 is going to be an in-person, and we're going to get even deeper and talk about cost-saving strategies and what your plan might look like. So if you would, please bear with me for a brief Haran commercial, and then we will jump into the agenda and presentation. So Haran is celebrating 70 years providing legendary service as we work to control healthcare costs, protect your wealth, and ensure your life. But the end game for all that we do at Haran is more than a set of plans. We believe good health and true wealth create a better quality of life for our clients and their families. Haran offers solutions to three of the challenges Americans will face for the next several decades. We provide access to high-quality, affordable health care through the bridge of insurance. We provide planning and investment guidance to build wealth for your retirement and ultimately for the next generation. We design insurance products and services to mitigate the risk of living too long, dying too soon, or becoming disabled. Our services to individuals, families, and employers are designed around essential client needs, including, number 1, employee benefits consulting, number 2, life and disability income insurance, 3, wealth management, 4, individual health and Medicare, 5, financial and estate planning, and 6, achieving retirement readiness through effective retirement plan consulting. It's a lot of things. But we believe that our core values of integrity, corporate social responsibility, and innovation are a key part of our success. Our values are embedded in the way we operate for our clients and the communities where we live and work. Today is our focus, tongue-tied, is on the basics of self-funding. So just some quick housekeeping items. As you see on your screen, we have some keywords that you're going to want to take care of or keep track of today. In order to qualify for CE credits, there will be 3 of these keywords that you'll need to email to the address on the screen. And there will be one in the middle and one at the end, and those will go over to Chris Huggard. And once you send those over to her, and you need to get those to her by the end of the day tomorrow, Wednesday, May the 15th, you'll receive an email from her with your continuing education certificate. And then for our final point, you can submit questions or ask for clarification using the Q&A panel on the screen. We will reserve time at the end to review those, but if there's something that needs immediate clarification, we could address those as we go, so just put that information in there. If the Q&A panel is not immediately available, to the right of your screen, there's an icon at the bottom that will allow you to open the panel should you have a question. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And don't forget to write down that keyword number 1, self-funding. So here's our agenda. And as we work through our agenda today, we will answer 4 questions. What are the differences between fully insured and self-funded? Why would someone transition to self-funded? What are some of the traits that make a great self-funded plan? And what to expect when you transition to being self-funded? A couple of icons to watch out for during our presentation. The first one are the building blocks. The building blocks are things to draw your attention and know that we are going to build on these in our next 2 sessions. There's so much that we could cover, and some of these topics could have their own 1-hour session. So we want to make sure that we touch on them and give you a basis for them and just be prepared to learn more in future sessions. Putting a pin in it is something that should draw your attention and give you something to look into a little bit further or discuss and dig into further with your Horan account team. So you'll notice those as we go throughout the presentation. Keep those in mind as we go. Okay, so in my book of business, I've been noticing that fully insured employers of all sizes are asking about self-funding. It's a really hot topic right now, and it's fueled by frustrations. So, Dacre, what are some of the frustrations that employees face in a fully insured environment?
So the buzz around self-funding starts with some of the frustrations we see in the fully insured market. Just like a lot of the solutions and innovative products of our day, we see it starts with some of the frustrations. I think about some of those products like Uber, Airbnb. My most recent one that I've been using lately is Facebook Marketplace. A lot of these products came about due to some of the frustrations with the current arrangement, frustrations in the taxi industry, in the hotel industry. My current one with Facebook Marketplace is the frustrations around using Craigslist. If you've ever gone through using Craigslist, it's a little bit clunky, the communication is a little bit clunky, and then you have the whole issue with trying to figure out who you're going to meet up with. The 2 options are that you can either meet up in a gas station and feel like you're doing some sort of illegal transaction, or you can, God forbid, meet at your own house. And I've gone through that with much anxiety from both me and my wife, trying to figure out who's going to show up at our house to do this transaction. If you haven't used Facebook Marketplace to look into stuff like that, I highly recommend it. It's a great product. But really, all of those products were started out of some sort of frustration. And really, it's the same way with self-funding. One of the frustrations I hear a lot about is lack of health plan data. When it comes down to it, when you transfer that claims risk to a carrier, and the carrier is the one that's paying the claims, the carrier is also the one that figures out how much detail they choose to release to the employers and to Horan. With that, it makes it hard to get detail on large claimants to be used in potentially going out to bid with RFP. There's also makes it hard to answer certain data questions around your population health, as well as being able to identify some of those cost drivers and utilization trends. Really what this boils down to is it makes it hard for employers to use their data, to use it to drive strategic decision making. Another frustration we hear a lot about is carrier profit. The reality is that anytime there's a transfer of risk to another organization, there's going to be some sort of profit involved. The insurance carriers are not 501c3s. They're not in it to not make money. They're in it to make money. And again, our job at Horan in that arena is to make sure that the profit for the carrier is kept in check and kept at a fair and reasonable amount. But the reality for employers is that during a favorable claims year, where claims are lower than expected, the carrier is the one that directly benefits from that in the form of carrier profit. I think there's a general frustration about the carrier being that direct beneficiary. The last frustration I hear a lot about is the tight renewal timeline that clients are feeling. To be clear, it's typically in the best interest of a carrier to release the renewal later in the plan year rather than earlier for a few reasons. One of those reasons is that it allows them to collect more claims data, which allows them to project more accurately for their underwriting practices. It also puts some of the leverage in the hands of the carrier because it forces the client to make a quicker decision maybe than they would like to. Ultimately, this makes it harder for the client and makes the quicker decision harder for them to leverage the market, harder to negotiate, and ultimately, again, just put some of that leverage into the hands of the carrier. Another frustration I hear from finance a lot on this point is that it forces finance departments to have to set budgets later in the plan year than maybe they would like. The overall theme on this page that I would like to just note is that I kind of call all these frustrations some frustrations with what I call the fully insured game. The reality of the matter is that we can negotiate, we can leverage the market, we can threaten to go to another carrier, we can make plan design changes, all of those things. And we do all those things here at Horan to ultimately help leverage that market. But when it comes down to it, it's not the client that is in control of the premium rates. It's not Horan that's in complete control of the premium rates. It is the carrier. And that lack of control, as well as the attitude that feels a little bit more transactional rather than a partnership, that lack of control and more transactional relationship is some of the frustrations that I hear. So maybe you're feeling like that guy on the right-hand side with the hammer. I hope not, because it's only Tuesday. We've got a few more days left in the week. But the good news is that through self-funding, there's relief for a lot of these frustrations.
And Dacre, I think we feel as account managers this pain for our clients too. So I guess the next question is, how does self-funding alleviate some of those frustrations?
So a lot of the benefits of self-funding provide or soothe some of those pain points in the fully insured arrangement. The biggest one is that the employer, when they are the one taking on the claims, they are also the one that retains those funds that are not spent on claims. So during a favorable claims year, it's the employer the one that benefits directly, not the carrier in the form of profit. You also save some on taxes and fees that apply towards a fully insured arrangement that do not apply towards a self-funded. Those specifically are state insurance taxes as well as the ACA insurer fee is expected to come back for 2020. As well as, again, we eliminate a lot of the carrier profit out of the equation. Not all of it, but it is cut down substantially. There's also a first year's quote-unquote savings due to the claims lag. We're going to talk about this a little bit more in next week's session. But the key thing to note here is that when you transition from a fully insured arrangement to a self-funded arrangement, there's a lag on when the claims are paid. And especially in the first few months, we see that those claims are lower than what they typically are due to that lag. What this means for employers, that first year claims cost is a little bit lower than average. And we recommend that our clients use that savings to build their reserve in their first year. This is essential for employers to build this up to ultimately help them to weather some of the claims fluctuations that they're inevitably going to have under a self-funded arrangement. The last few bullet points here touch on some of the flexibility that we get under self-funding. The first one being under a self-funded plan, with the employer now being the one that is paying claims and owning that risk. They are the ones that control and ultimately have more detail around the data. This allows us, again, to be able to identify more of those cost drivers and utilization patterns, and really allows me and us as a team to be able to tell that data story that you can use to make data-driven decisions. You can also get a little more plan design flexibility. So under a self-funded arrangement, there's just more flexibility there, while in a fully insured, you typically have to work within some of the plan design constraints that the fully insured carrier sets up. And lastly, there's an ability to be able to partner with more carriers and vendors. And it's not that these carriers and vendors aren't available to fully insured clients. The key here that I want to point out is that on the spectrum of fully insured and self-funding, fully insured is typically a little more of a passive approach to healthcare, while self-funding is a more active approach to healthcare. And with that more active approach to healthcare, you're able to partner with organizations, and the return on investment that you receive by partnering with those different best-in-class organizations is just stronger, and those vendors are more applicable and relevant to self-funded plans than a fully insured plan.
Well, that sounds exciting. So from a high level, would you mind walking us through the differences between a fully insured and a self-funded plan and those different ways to purchase the insurance?
Absolutely. The first way to purchase insurance that we've been talking about a lot already is a fully insured arrangement. Again, a fully insured arrangement is when you pay premium to an insurance carrier to take on your claims risk. It's typically a bundled package where the administration and all the costs are all together with one insurance carrier. The plan designs are typically a little more canned and standard. You can make deviations here and there and make some adjustments to customize, but more or less you have to work within the platform that they have. But the key again here is that the carrier is the one that is holding the risk and paying the claims. And in that premium cost, the employer receives more predictable costs on a monthly basis than they do under self-funded. The second way is called self-funded ASO, or administrative services only. And I want to point out here too, real quick, we might use the term self-insurance. You might hear self-insurance or self-insured versus self-funded. Just know that those terms we typically use interchangeably, but some use those terms differently than others. But under an ASO contract, it's actually very similar to a fully insured contract in many ways. Typically, it's more of a bundled package where you purchase all of your services within one carrier. There's typically a little more flexibility in the plan design under a self-funded ASO contract. The biggest difference here is that it is now the employer, the ones that hold the risk and pays claims on a weekly basis. With that, the claims are going to fluctuate on a week-to-week and really throughout the plan year with that employee utilization. Some of the insurance carriers that we see that operate in the ASO are really the same insurance carriers that operate in the fully insured arena. So the Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare, Humana, Aetna, Cigna, Medical Mutual of Ohio, all of those carriers also operate under the self-funded ASO model also. The last thing I want to say about ASO is that we typically see the clients that make that transition from fully insured to self-funded do so in the first year through a self-funded ASO contract. The reason for that is that typically the model is a little more similar to the fully insured model in the way that it's administered. And ultimately, the ease of administration and the transition is a little smoother going from fully insured to self-funded ASO. The last model that I want to talk about today is self-funded TPA, or self-funded third-party administrator, is what that stands for. TPA model is very similar to the self-funded ASO, but it really just takes that flexibility to another level. With the purchasing model being more a la carte rather than bundled, you get to pick and choose what programs and services that you want. Again, you still have the employer holding the risk and paying claims with that employee utilization fluctuating. And you get even more flexibility in plan design with some other additional options that come up, like tiered networks or reference-based pricing. Some of those come into play more with a TPA model than with ASO. The last thing I want to say about all these options is that this is not an exhaustive list of all the insurance options that are out there. There are others that fit a lot of times in the spectrum, maybe between 1 and 2 or 2 and 3, but these are really the most prominent and the ones that we want to focus on today.
Dacre, there are also carriers that offer like partial self-funded or level premium products. that allow you to dip your toe in the water to test it out and get a feel for self-funding if you're not ready to jump all the way in. So that's another thing I know that we see some of our clients participate in, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
And one thing to keep in mind, this is something with the ASO and the TPA, it can be a little confusing. There's some definite nuances there between the two. So those are things that we will build on in the next session. There's your little building block right there. Okay, so Dacre, I know there's a lot of similarities and a lot of differences between fully insured and self-funded. Can you walk us through and talk to us about the plan components of a fully insured plan, and then kind of help us understand what might be different and the same with the self-funded?
Absolutely. So with the fully insured plan, it really all starts with the insurance carrier charging premium to administer and cover the claims costs. Within that premium goes to cover a few different cost buckets. One of the first areas is administrative costs. These costs go towards utilizing the network of the carrier that you're using, as well as the cost to administer and adjudicate the claims within your plan. There's also some general costs that include the premium and taxes that I mentioned, again, that account for typically around 3 to 5% of overall cost of a fully insured plan. There's also some costs associated with pooling or risk pooling. Typically, you hear the term a pooling point, which is paid for by a pooling charge, and there's some costs associated with that, that ultimately those go towards protecting you against high-cost claimants adversely impacting your renewal at your upcoming renewal. There's also some general expenses in here, too. These are to cover general overhead costs, underwriting costs, as well as sometimes the carriers will say costs to keep the lights on, quote unquote. The biggest piece that premium goes towards, though, is the claims. The carrier is the one that holds the claims risk completely, and they're the ones that pay claims as they come in. And on that note, too, the carrier also builds up some reserves to cover them against some of those fluctuations and against being able to pay run-out claims should you ever leave that carrier in the future. But those reserves are held by the carrier. What this all means is that after you take the premium and you deduct out all of these costs, it results in a potential profit for the health insurance carrier, especially during a favorable claims year. So during a favorable claims year, the carrier is the one that's directly benefited from that and ultimately results in additional profit for the carrier. The last thing I want to say on this page is that, you know, it's not all roses around this. There is also times, there's reasons why clients go into fully insured, because you can have a bad claims year. And so on certain years where you had an adverse claims year, also there can be a loss where the insurance carrier, there may not be a whole lot of profit, or they may take a loss on that given plan year. But over the long term, what we see is that carriers typically make profit over a multi-year period.
Great. Now, how does that compare to a self-funded plan?
So the components of a self-funded plan are actually very similar to a fully insured plan in many ways, but it starts in a different way, with the employer being the one that funds those different components directly. Again, you still have the administrative costs, but now you're paying a third-party administrator or a health insurance through an ASO contract. Those are costs that go to adjudicate the claims, just like fully insured. There's also some costs to protect you against high-cost claimants, now in the form of what we call stop-loss. So there's specific stop-loss and there's aggregate stop-loss. Those go to protect you against specific individual large-cost claimants, as well as large-cost claimants as a whole for a catastrophic claims year. The biggest difference between self-funded and fully insured is this claims bucket, where now the employer is the one that is paying claims out of an employer bank account on a weekly basis. Another big difference that we see here is now the employer that builds up and holds those reserves, so there's a cash flow benefit there, and maybe be able to earn a little bit of interest on those reserves also. One of the things you might notice under the cost bucket is that there's no taxes and fees under a self-funded plan. They're not applicable under a self-funded plan, so that's a cost savings over a fully insured plan that you receive. Again, typically about 3 to 5% of savings that you avoid. Again, kind of combining those savings on taxes and fees, as well as the fact that during a favorable claims year now, it is the employer that directly benefits from that and ultimately cuts out a lot of that carrier profit as well as those taxes and fees. We find that over the long term, because of those savings, that typically there is a financial savings over the long haul, over multiple years under a self-funded plan over a fully insured plan.
And it looks like stop loss is going to be something you're going to go into in more detail in the future sessions.
Absolutely, yeah. Stop loss is a big topic. There's a lot of details and nuances, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that next week.
Great. Okay, well, it went by quick. There it is. Our keyword number 2 is claims, so make sure you write that down if you are interested in the CE credit. Now that we understand the basics of self-funding and some of those key terms, how do you determine if it would be a good fit for your organization? You know, there are some traditional traits that make you a great candidate. They don't always apply. If you don't have them all, it doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad fit for a candidate. But beyond those traits, it's important to ask a few questions. The first one is, I guess, do you have some of those traits? The second one is, do you have the cash flow to sustain paying claims on a weekly basis? Do you crave more flexibility in decision-making and in your plan design? And the fourth one is, are you comfortable with the additional requirements to keep your plan compliant? Because there are a few more things you've got to do there as well. Dacre, let's talk about some of those traits that make an organization a great candidate for self-funding.
Some of the traits and some of the organizational traits, before I even touch on this list, I want to preface it with, just because you have all of these traits potentially, or just because you have none of them, does not necessarily mean that you are a great candidate, or that you should be self-funded, or that you shouldn't be self-funded. Really, each one of these buckets, you see there's employees or the demographics of your population, your financial situation. There's also kind of a claims bucket. Each one of these traits, to me, indicates stability of the organization as a whole. And again, we see that the stability of an organization really lends itself to whether you're going to have long-term self-funding success as a whole. So you see some of those things such as enrollment size. Is your workforce growing or stable? Is your cash flow consistent, as well as some of your claims? Do you have favorable large claims experience? Steady claims performance over the past 2 to 3 years. I think all clients can look at that one and say, man, I wish I had steady claims performance over the past 2 to 3 years. The reality is if we didn't see any fluctuation, then there wouldn't be a need for a fully insured carrier. But all of these traits, again, just lend themselves to stability of the organization as a whole. So the question I would ask yourself here, again, is does your organization have the traditional traits to be a good candidate for self-funding?
Thanks, Dacre. Now, you also mentioned cash flow as an important consideration. Can you give us a little more information on that one?
Cash flow is a big piece of evaluating self-funding. So again, with the fully insured arrangement, you can see on the left-hand side that the cost, or in orange, is relatively steady over the plan year. The costs are predictable on a month-to-month basis, even though the claims, or you can see in blue, fluctuate throughout the plan year. Under a self-funded plan, that changes a little bit, with the biggest portion of your overall cost being claims now. Claims typically represent about 60 to 80%, sometimes even more, of your overall cost. And now the cost of your plan, for the most part, is your claims cost, directly related with your claims cost, which is paid on a weekly basis out of that employer bank account like we talked about. You can see now that there's some fluctuations in that claims over the plan year, with some peaks and some valleys in there. And it's essential for you to evaluate as an organization if you can cover and sustain those peaks and valleys. Now, some of you guys might be looking at this and saying, well, Dacre, that's a lot. There's maybe some concern around those ups and downs, the fluctuation in costs. And what I want to make sure I point out here is that there are financial protections in place to help protect you against some of those peak months, as well as help you to budget on those valley months. One of those protections is in the form of reinsurance or stop loss, like we've been talking about, and there's different ways to institute your reinsurance or stop loss to manage your claims risk the way you would like to. There's some other items like accurate budgeting that can help you to project and figure out what your expected costs are for the upcoming year, as well as overall level reserving. All of those items are there to help you to manage some of those fluctuation in claim costs throughout the year. The key here, and again, the question that I want to ask on this page is, do you have the cash flow to sustain paying claims on a weekly basis? So
you mentioned, having those reserves and budgeting, can you just talk about with those considerations? And I know we're going to go into those in the next session, but what are some of those?
Yeah, again, the considerations, and we're going to touch on this next week. I mentioned the reserving and then the budgeting and expected costs. We'll touch on this more next week, but this is another item that ultimately helps you to sustain the fluctuation in claims and make it not as arduous for the client to manage that. We're also going to touch on, again, more of the detail of stop loss, touching on the different types of stop loss, as well as some understanding of your data, incurred and paid, mature versus immature. Stay tuned on that. We're going to talk more about that next week.
Dacre, what can an organization expect in terms of additional administration?
So going back to that comment about self-funding being a more active approach to healthcare, it really translates into the administrative responsibilities in that the administrative responsibilities require a more hands-on approach to decision-making. I like to use an analogy around buying a house. One way to buy a house, which is a lot like a fully insured arrangement, is to buy a house that's already built. My wife and I actually just recently went through this. We bought our first house, and she's loving it. She's going through and decorating the house. We've painted the whole house, which if you've never done that before, I'm not sure if I'd recommend it. But there's redecorating. We're able to make it our own in many ways. But there's also some layouts of the house that we never really realized that we would have liked different until we've been in it. One of those things is I didn't even know what a foyer was until I have a house. But now we like to entertain a lot, and we really would like a space to be able to kind of welcome people into our home. We don't have that right now. There's not a whole lot of ways to add that. We have this weird transition room that you have to go through to get to our staircase. These are all kind of layout options that maybe we wouldn't have chosen, but it's a lot like how a fully insured plan works. Ultimately, you can make those decorations, you can decorate the house, you can paint, maybe do some renovations here and there, but the layout is generally set and the house is built. A self-funded plan is a lot more like building a custom home. There's a lot more options for you to choose. Maybe for our next home, maybe we'll be able to do something like add a foyer, or maybe you really like to cook and you want a huge kitchen. Maybe you like to read and you want a reading room. Maybe you want to have a soaker tub. Whatever those things are, you get to customize the home in whatever way you'd like. With that, there's a lot more decisions and choices to be made. There's more for you to be involved in. Similar to a self-funded plan, there's decisions to be made around what network do you want to use, the administrator that you want to use, different bolt-ons like disease management, telemedicine, other vendors and partners that we talked about earlier. There's just more choices to be made, and with that comes a transition or change potentially in the roles that your team plays in managing this plan. One of the questions I would ask you with that is what roles will finance play and what roles will HR play in this new arrangement? With this transition to self-funding, it just requires a more hands-on approach. And with staying true with that house analogy, the way that I like to think about Haran is that we are like your expert team of contractors here to guide you and provide recommendations along the way. It's not that you have to make all those decisions on your own. We're here to help you, give you the considerations and the viability of each one of those options to help you along the way. Ultimately, the end result of all these decisions is a plan design and risk structure that is a more tailored fit to your organization and its goals. We're going to continue to talk about this more next week, but the question I want to ask you on this section is, do you crave more flexibility in your decision making?
Dacre, thanks. And it's good to know that there are options between the ASO and the TPA, and there's a little bit of that security blanket to transition from fully insured to maybe an ASO plan where some of those decisions, there aren't as many decisions to make, I guess.
Absolutely.
Because that could potentially be a little overwhelming. It's good to have some guides as well. So as Dacre said, the fully insured situation is a little more of a hands-off approach. A lot of those decisions are made for you. It's already packaged and ready to go. Self-funded is definitely more hands-on, especially in the area of compliance. So we've pinned a couple of the points here, one of those being ACA reporting, the other being HIPAA and security, because there are some additional responsibilities that you have to take on in a self-funded environment. The good news is that your account team, along with Haran's compliance gurus, can help walk you through and put all those pieces into place to make sure that you can check all those boxes on the compliance checklist. make sure that all of your ACA reporting is done in the way it should be done, and you've got the right vendors to help you with that if needed. And then as far as the HIPAA and security, also great resource to be able to give you guidelines and putting those HIPAA plans in place. So no worries there. We are here to help get you set up for success. Okay, so how are you doing so far? You have heard about some good traits to make you a candidate, or that might make you a great candidate for self-funding. You've had, you're thinking about cash flow. How do you feel about the cash flow that you've got to sustain paying those claims on a weekly basis? And do you have those resources available, or can you make them available to take on a little more of a hands-on approach with your plan? So, as we're going through those tools, those are things to continue to be thinking about. The other thing to think about is in the line of self-funded maturity. So what we find is important when you transition from fully insured to self-funded is the timing of the plan. We find that a lot of our clients transition into a self-funded environment in a year that they're faced with a big fully insured renewal. And in order to, bring those costs down, they decide they're going to make that leap. And so the timing is really important. What we see is then in that first year, as Dacre said, your claims aren't as mature in the first year, so you might see a little bit of savings there. But you're also, because you're not paying as much in the administration and some of those different things to the fully insured carrier, you're going to see a little bit of a lower renewal in that first year. I will remind you as we get into years 2 and 3, and you'll see, you can probably imagine, this is a long-term play. So this is not a short, I'm going to jump into self-funding one year and then jump back into fully insured the next year. It's really a long-term commitment because you need to be able to work over those peaks and valleys, as Dacre talked about earlier. You've got the low claims years, and every so often you have those high claims years. So this is a long-term play and as part of your long-term strategy. As you do become more mature, though, we see that those renewal increases start to average out, and they start to they feel a little bit better. So there's a lot of things to consider here, but it's a very successful option for a lot of our clients. So, Dacre, what are some of those other tools that are available that our clients can utilize to help determine, is self-funding a good option? Now we think it's good, but let's make sure, and then things to kind of carry them through.
The evaluation starts again with those questions that Jen asked, evaluating from a self-assessment, asking yourself those questions and being really honest about what the answers are. Maybe you go through that process and you say, yeah, we think self-funding is maybe a good fit for our organization based on those answers. The next step that we would take you through is we would do what's called a self-funded retroactive analysis. This is a 3 to 5 year look back that says, what if we had been self-funded over the past 3 to 5 years? Would there have been a savings or a loss versus what we paid out in fully insured premium? Typically, we see over a long term, a 3 to 5 year period, that there's typically some sort of savings there. However, there are times where there's a loss there. Maybe we go through that exercise and we see some of that savings. Not only do we look back in a self-funded retro, but we're also going to look forward through what we call a self-funded projection. The self-funded projection is a analysis that says what do we expect for those costs to be under a self-funded plan for the upcoming plan year. And we're able to compare those costs against what the fully insured market is yielding through your renewal as well as maybe an RFP process. To ultimately see the self-funding seem like a good option, or really this kind of brings in the timing of it too, like Jen said. Does the timing of it seem like there's some savings for the upcoming plan year under a self-funded projection? It's essential that you have an expert in your court for these projections, because ultimately the projections are only as good as the methodology and the people that are behind it. One of the things that we're really proud of here at Horan and our financial analyst team is the accuracy of our projections. We're typically across our book of business within 3% of actual costs year over year. What this means for your organization is that you can be confident in using our projections and setting accurate budget for your organization. Not only do we go through that projection process and help you set your budgets, but we also, after that, go through and we track your progress and your performance throughout the plan year. So one of the things we do is what's called a monthly report that tracks your financials throughout the plan year so you can see how things are tracking. We also are able to do deep dives into the data multiple times a year through what we call our plan performance review. And again, because in a self-funded plan we have more granular access to the data, this allows us to identify more of those cost drivers and utilization patterns, and we use those to develop strategic action plans to impact those costs and to meet your organization's goals. The goal of all of this is to bring our consulting expertise to provide you with the data and those insights that you need to make informed decisions throughout this process. That's really how we bring our expertise to the evaluation.
And that plan performance review that you mentioned, because you've got that extra data, it allows you to do a little predictive modeling too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the things that's really exciting about the data capabilities we have through self-funding is that we're able to not only look at what claims have come in and track kind of prior performance and see what is measurable, but we're also able to say, based on the claims data that we're seeing with individual claimants, where do we expect for those costs for those claimants to go over the next 12 months? So it's not just an ability to track the progress that's already happened, the performance that already has happened, but it also allows us to predict out and have some accurate projections for where we see those claimants going in the future.
That would be great. I know for our clients that have, that are fully insured, that do get some reporting now, most of it is looking back, and so it's kind of hard. It's good to know, but it doesn't necessarily always prepare you for what might be to come. So that would be really handy. Okay, so just to draw your attention back to some of our key takeaways and our pins and our building blocks, the compliance requirements, the ACA reporting and HIPAA and security policies, those are all things to dig into with your HRAN team, both your account team and the compliance team. And then we've got a few topics on here just to be looking forward to in 201. And just as a reminder, 201 is next week, so we hope you'll join us for that. So to wrap us up today with some of our key takeaways. So one of the things to be thinking about is your risk tolerance. How do you feel about paying those claims? Do you have what it takes? Can you take on that additional risk that right now your insurance carrier is holding? Stability is another big topic and an important buzzword for us. So it's stability in a number of different things. Does your business have the stability to, again, pay the claims? You've got some consistent cash flow, those types of things. But are you also looking for that stability in your renewal? Timing is key, and that's where our reporting comes into play, and some of the retro analysis and different things like that to help you figure out what is the best time to do this. If it's not now, we can continue to monitor that and look at it with you for the future. And then the consulting. So while this seems like a lot, and it is a bit different, you're taking on a little more responsibility, you're in a more hands-on environment, please just rest assured that you've got a great team behind you to help walk you through this. We have a great panel of experts on our financial consultant, our account teams, with compliance, just throughout the organization that can help you navigate this path. So just definite things to think about as we go into next week and our third session, which is going to be in person and will be a great live way to interact with our panel as well. Okay. So some homework for you as we prepare for next week and beyond. Review the glossary of terms, and then attend session 201 on May the 21st, and that's where we will unpack some plan components, talk about those team roles and responsibilities. We don't want there to be any questions or like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I had to do this. So you will understand who does what. We'll talk about financial protections in the form of the stop-loss insurance, and we'll talk to you a little bit more and go into a little more detail about the data that you can get through our HRAnalytics. Okay, last keyword, don't forget about this one. This is evaluation. Make sure that you email all 3 keywords to chrish@haranassoc.com by the end of the day tomorrow, and she will get you your CE certificate sent off to you. And then questions. We definitely wanted to make sure that we left time for questions.
So we just had a question come in, and I get this question a lot when we start talking about self-funding and fully insured. And one of the questions I hear is there any member disruption from transitioning to self-funding? So does the member feel this transition when you do it? And one of the answers to that question is, assuming that you keep your plan design the same, more or less there's going to be very little or no member disruption in a transition to self-funding. That being said, you can choose to share with your employee population that you are a self-funded entity, and that what that means overall, that transition from purchasing through an insurance carrier to now the employer taking on that claims responsibility. And I think that for a lot of our clients that choose to do that, it changes the dynamic with the client, the employees, and the carrier overall. It creates more of a partnership where you're communicating to your employees that, hey, we're in this together. We're the ones that are paying claims directly out of our bank account. Therefore, we're going to do what we can. Ultimately, we want your help to ultimately impact those claims, because those claims costs ultimately impact the organization as a whole. It might impact salaries. It might impact different tools to purchase throughout the organization. Overall, just the success of the organization at all. And I think that really it starts to forge more of a partnership between those 3 different entities that maybe wasn't part of that arrangement before.
Okay, and I know we did have a question come in about keyword number 2. I know that screen flashed kind of funny. So keyword number 2 was claims. Don't tell anybody I told you, since you were supposed to listen to it in the middle, but I know it was a funny screen, so we'll let that one go. Okay, another question that we had, do I get more reporting data when I become self-funded?
Absolutely. Within a fully insured arrangement, our team as a financialist team, we have to work within the constraints of the detail that the carrier is going to provide. Typically, that means that we're able to pull, I would say, a fair amount of data, but generally it's a little more high level. It's more of a dashboard look at data rather than a granular look. Under a self-funding plan, through the data warehouse and be able to aggregate your data and be able to drill and slice and dice, we're able to answer more difficult questions. So maybe you have a specific question around your population, like how much are my spouses costing in musculoskeletal costs? That might be something that is tougher to answer, or maybe not be able to answer within a fully insured, but we're able to get answers to that quickly. Also, this changes the standard reporting for self-funded is also deeper. So under a fully insured, we might produce or might be able to access a report that maybe is a length of 7 to 8 pages, and we'll pull out some of the insights from that. The reality under self-funded is we put together our standard sort of offering is our plan performance review. It's a 31-page report, which, trust me, we're not going to have to make you read through 31 pages, but again, this allows us to get to a deeper level to be able to answer tougher questions and to be able to draw out those insights that allow us to use those in the strategy of the plan overall. And so we might be able to pull out some data around preventive utilization that you're going to use in supporting your preventive program, your wellness program in the future. Items like that just allow us to use the data more strategically to impact that claim spend.
Okay, we have another question, and the question was, will Haran assist in picking all the vendors for like the admin, pharmacy, network, things of that nature? And yes, we definitely do assist with that. Just like we do an RFP in a fully insured environment with carriers, we would do the same thing with all of those other carriers and all those other vendors that are attached to that. So as far as who that ASO might be, or if it's a TPA and you want to carve out your pharmacy and make that separate and things of that nature, we definitely help you and assist you with looking at the best fit for your organization and your plan. Okay, and then next question that came in, and thank you guys for your questions. It really helps kind of do that sharing with everybody. Dacre, what do we often recommend as far as a reserve goes? So you mentioned setting aside reserves to kind of help, in that first year with those kind of ups and downs. Do we have kind of a rule of thumb?
The general rule of thumb is we recommend typically between 1 and 2 months between 1 and 2 months of claims costs in reserve. Typically that represents anywhere between 8 to 15% of your annual claims costs. And again, these reserves are meant to help you to manage some of those fluctuations and those peaks claims months by dipping into your reserves on those peak months, as well as building those reserves back up on the valley months. And really, again, those reserves are meant to help you kind of weather those fluctuations, as well as pay out run-out claims in the future potentially. So really, again, it's that 1 to 2 months is sort of the general rule of thumb. Now, for public entities, I want to make sure to note that for a public entity, it is required that they hold 2 months in reserves. So that's another kind of consideration if you're a public entity to have to manage that. And again, I would say that this also you can also bring the risk tolerance into this equation too. There might be certain organizations that feel a little more comfortable with a lower reserve level. There might be other organizations that want to hold a lot more reserves to be able to manage some of those fluctuations. I think there's an element of your risk tolerance that comes into how much reserves you want to hold as an organization, but overall, that 1 to 2 months is a good number to go by.
Okay. Next question, do I have to wait until my plan renews before I convert to self-funding?
That's a good question. Technically, no. There is the ability to transition in a mid-year. However, I will say that that's probably going to be very, there might be a little more disruption as an organization throughout that process. I would say typically the best practice is to do it at a renewal time. It just makes the whole process from purchasing stop loss and the administration, all really the components of the self-funded plan to go a little more smoothly. And overall, I think that's probably the best practice and recommendation for Haran. Now, I'm not going to say that that's not impossible to do that. There are, clients out there that have talked about making mid-year plan changes, and we've gone through the analysis to analyze that. Typically, we just see that is a little more of a difficult and just a little more tricky situation to kind of walk through and manage. And with the transition to self-funding already being somewhat of a large transition in the way that the plan is funded, we typically recommend that you just wait till your upcoming renewal to go through that transition.
Thank you. Thanks. And then it looks like we've got one more. So this one is talking about, liking the idea of the benefits of self-funding, but this organization tends to be a little more risk averse. So are there ways, even though you don't like to take as much risk to take advantage of self-funding, what would you recommend in that case?
You can absolutely take advantage of a lot of the benefits of self-funding while still being a fairly risk-averse organization. Some of those ways are, again, we kind of talked about the budgeting. You can choose maybe to hold more reserves to manage those fluctuations. And again, those reserves are held by the employer, so you still get to benefit from that from cash flow standpoint. But you can also choose to purchase a different level of stop loss to basically fit your risk tolerance. So we're going to talk more about stop loss next week, but basically you can set your specific deductible at a lower level, which ultimately caps your risk at a lower level. Now, the drawback of doing that is that you will pay more in stop loss premium to be able to kind of handle some of that lower risk tolerance because you're offsetting more risk to a stop loss carrier. However, as you still get to avoid and save on those taxes and fees because you're self-funded, and you get to eliminate out a lot of that carrier profit by still being a self-funded entity, but just with a lowered risk tolerance and ultimately a different risk level. And on the other side of that, too, you may be an organization that is no problem taking on a lot of risk, and therefore we can set the stop-loss level accordingly for that organization also.
Okay. Are reserves based on monthly expected claims?
Are reserves based on monthly expected claims? I would say overall, yes. I mean, the expected claims themselves are going to be based on your actual claims. So overall, I would say that we would probably say that the reserves are based on those expected claims, or we could take a look at how your claims have operated or panned out over the past couple of years on a monthly basis to be able to help you with that reserve calculation. We also can go through and do a report that tracks some of those to help you with the reserving. We can go through and do some other reporting like what we call our incurred but not reported report. And that's also a report that helps you track some of those run-out claims costs that help you to ultimately help you to build those accurate reserving so your organization feels comfortable with how much they need to reserve to cover some of those claims costs and those fluctuations.
Okay. Has there ever been a self-insured company that, despite having that stop-loss coverage in place, incurred a high number of significant claims in the same year that ultimately had a negative effect on their business?
I think the answer to that is it depends on where your risk level is at. So if that is it, I think what you're kind of getting at here is if your concern is that a adverse claim year might impact your claim or impact your organization as a whole, that maybe you are a more risk-adverse organization, and therefore we could set your stop-loss level accordingly. But to answer the question, I think you have to kind of develop and form your risk structure to meet your needs. So again, if that's a concern of yours where you think that if we have a bad claims year, this could impact a lot of other aspects of our business, then we can set your risk tolerance accordingly through the stop-loss and the reserving. To answer your question, though, I think as a whole, if it's not set accordingly, or if you don't have a consultant in your ring that's kind of helping you manage that risk and your risk tolerance, then yeah, that can happen where there is a downside to self-funding in that if you have a bad claims year, there might be every 3 to 4 years where you have a bad claims year that might be a little higher than expected, or maybe you would have paid more than you would under a fully insured arrangement. But again, I think that the key here is making sure that you're analyzing on a yearly basis what are our business goals and setting your risk tolerance and your stop-loss levels accordingly to manage those.
And that's where aggregate stop-loss comes in as well, too. That's what we call your sleep good at night insurance. That just helps from a looking at your whole plan and the claims overall instead of that specific claim. It's looking at all of your claims as a whole and providing you some protection there as well.
Yeah, and to add to that, the aggregate stop-loss is typically set at 125 or 25% above your expected claims. That's developed by the stop-loss carrier, but what really that means is that you're capped out at a certain level of what your overall liability is for an organization. So again, it's not that you have unlimited risk. With that aggregate stop-loss, it caps you out at a certain level, and ultimately your risk above that level is not going higher than that.
It's like your out-of-pocket max for your plan instead of your out-of-pocket max as an individual. So, okay, good. Great questions. Thank you guys so much for participating today. We've got, looks like 2 minutes to go, so we're going to let you sneak out maybe just a minute early. But thanks for your participation, for listening. We hope to see you back and hear you back next Wednesday for our 201, and then also in our live session that follows that one. So it's Tuesday. Sorry, it's Tuesday. Goodness. Not looking at my calendar right. All right, thanks so much. Have a great day.